Det er godt å gjøre.
Lamadan Gombo Jambe Yong No Sha Tsa Lo Gong Ge Lo Ge Dim Nye Dun Dar Nye Dra Nam Da Rab Sra Ve Chi Nye Dun Gun Shi Nye Zai Shra Nye Che Tu Gra Le Wan Zai Gong Da Si Be Zun Ri Ma Ri Min Tam Dung Ra Chi Zai We Ro So Gong La Bu Je Dar Yin Lai Zhu Ju Yong Den Song Dara che ro nyu mo nyin le che chak ro ron ze chen ma re me sel ra je nam de ne da je sa ju dar ze yen den lu ya se tu yu ku chun ra ju don chun ye jen da le me se jan be yong la du Zedene Cheje, Chinrai Vizreje, Dalu Demo Membara Srane, Kadai Denje, Jean Loi Dobaye, Loje, Pope Noa Saldo So. Gange Denjen de Wanjong, Kawame Ba, Jeme Ba, Cheba Me Ba, Tame Ba. Ong me pran ro me ba ta de de me den ji me zhe ba nie je xie den be zog be sang jie na nam je tam ba de la sha je wu ja mian sha na du je jin re ze sa ye nin bo zhe ba nam pra se re nam ge nin bo shang ba gun du zong nie we se xin jie la sha je wu xie jie kan la jin ra bi jin gu ru jian zai be dong du jie len la po Gyarwe ten bakun ne san zebe, ka ju rinpo che la sha je wu. Chö dong chö jen ne lu ma nur war, che jen zik ne chen be ye she je, ro so yi la gun ge pa tra wa, rik bi dur je shab la sha je wu. La so, tene, samba shong jup cho do, tu je ne,
So please begin by generating bodhicitta, which focuses on attaining, or which is about focusing on attaining enlightenment in order to benefit all beings, and with that as your motivation, listen attentively to the teachings of the sacred Buddha Dharma that are to be explained.
Tat rima chushe shuye de kasing hme chö thamje tongba tong dangme se tin su korne ma shuye yin.
So today's lecture will give you additional teachings regarding the third of the four seals that were explained during a series of lectures earlier. And that seal, as it were, is the statement or the explanation that Buddha Shakyamuni gave regarding the nature of reality, the fact that phenomena are empty and without a self. So it's a continuation of the teachings regarding that seal, the third of the four.
Tin de ta tim ma shu be hman tla kasing hme chwan nang song la ti je ne ngal ke je ting ka she chung ji charang ge chue she de ngolin de yan ra bu mong bu chi che ge do kar che ge yos che ti de ti kor te thang ba donas ke ma chung ta samna shi tra shi ji dang de to je ten su ko ji shu na Now,
previously, one of the listeners, or viewers rather, as to the teachings of the previous course regarding the Four Seals, sent a question regarding the various recitations Khenpo Rinpoche does before starting the lecture. What these recitations are, their significance, and so on. And at first, Khenpo Rinpoche explains he didn't give much thought to the question. However, there were thereafter a number of people who asked about the same, and he therefore gave some thought to the question, or that question, and decided that perhaps it's a good idea to speak a bit about the reasons for these recitations at the beginning of a lecture.
Tapen chetang lectures ngete shese yul tela samna chik tang shenkin kungsa range ya samna chik tang tende ki samna tang tang chik gene rogu gi yoche
da shepa poki samlo tang tang na masong na kogo geravata
ya shepa poki samna tang tang shese yul ke chedu shabe dosha ge netang tende netang mangbo chirtine shego gi yoche.
Now, a discourse, in terms of the person who gives the discourse, the lecture, would, prior to doing so, give thought to primarily three things, namely, in this case, the viewers, those who listen to the explanations given, and what their circumstances may or may not be, in terms of acquiring an understanding of what kind of presentation would be appropriate in the context of the mindsets of those who listen. Then there is considerations regarding the topic itself, namely the knowledge the speaker has of it and the presentation he would like to make, etc. And then there is a third thing, namely the speaker's own mindset in the context of doing what he's doing, namely giving a discourse on a topic of the Buddha Dharma.
Today in the Perna, top of Dharma, University of Chile, that Nambe Chogun or Chuba. Yina Shesatin get net young. Shese Tumbo tak Kumbatabo net young. Dorna Chikanser Gota, lecture dress a whole Dauchire Mato, Tene Penna Chepa Shum, Pungburu, Gusung Tutin Sha, Flappertu, Tasha Tambajame Tubeum Gutin, Trump, Tindres, Jenny Shaggy Omarwa. Jitamitan like Yashes again, nature.
No. Now, if one takes the example of a lecture at a school or at a university, the setting is specific. The place is one of a lecture hall or a classroom where teachers, lecturers, give discourses on various topics for the sake of educating those who are there, whether it's about a group of young children or a group of young adults at a university. The setting or the place is much the same. It's about a lecture hall where presentations of various topics are given by various individuals who have the qualifications for giving the discourses they do give. Now, these places are not places of worship, as it were. These places are part of educational institutions in the world, and therefore there isn't a Buddhist shrine in the lecture hall where one finds various sacred objects of art in the context of Buddhism. In particular, some representation of the founder of the Buddhist doctrine of our era, Buddha Shakyamuni. So the place in an educational institution where a lecture or on Buddhism or an introduction to Buddhism is given is quite different from a shrine room with the setup just described in brief, belonging to the Buddhist faith.
Pena Chedu Saga Durza Laser Yinkin Lebdeve de Metenzo Inayang Samna Tangtante Chetan Nangbeche Singa de Shija Jire Tik Kanded Segi Yona Chinchane Shijaji Dundunyer Sampa Mato Yin Yomate.
And the people who attend the lecture, whether in a classroom or a larger lecture hall at the university, those individuals will see the topic that is to be explained to them, or the topic they are introduced to, as a topic comparable to any other topic that's part of their education. So there, the mindset of those who listen would be different from the mindsets of a group of practicing Buddhists, for example. And so the lecturer has to consider this in terms of the presentation he gives, so that the presentation would suit, as it were, or would fit the circumstances.
Tagana Shinki lecture drinking Konsa Di Samo Layang Chitande Nangba Sanjebe Chugi Sheja Jichap something what Gogre Samba Mato Tene Shipjin Tower Lumping Yamne and Redne Shaggy Yubamare.
And if we take someone who works as a lecturer at, for example, a university, a person who isn't a practicing Buddhist himself, a person who simply lectures as to various Buddhist topics is presumably a person who views the topic he lectures on in quite a general way, namely as comparable to any other educational topic in terms of the educational system he works in. Therefore, the presentations would be quite general in terms of introducing or explaining about Buddhism to the students. There wouldn't be great detail in terms of, for example, the various stages of practicing the path or independence upon which the practitioner can attain enlightenment. Those perspectives would probably not be explained at all, and if a bit, just in general, in that the lecturer is a person who views this topic as comparable to any other topic that's part of the regular educational system in the country where he works.
Tene tachi kansargo tarba tenirge loyunki tendechi ge gonzala chedu sabe dojapena yinkin tenzo tarba tenirge loyunki chige chen yinkin chi la yang xie tangte doze mindao logu.
If we then take the example of a Buddhist practitioner who focuses upon practicing the Buddhist path in order to go beyond worldly types of existences, a presentation to a person like that would and should be quite different from the presentation or presentations given in the setting of a classroom or a university.
Tene shenking konsa ge ta lecture nangking konsa tel cha sha na yang samno tang tang te ta yin te ta menda ware ko samno tang tang kande chi go ge yar sana che korang ke korba tang ni sang ke dungal te ha ko te ha ko ye ma se
la so
tarba tenir ke konsa tenso la yang che korba tang ni sang ke dungal le te be samna chi wen do go ge
and if we consider the lecture in terms of explaining the Buddha Dharma to those of the Buddhist faith, then the person who speaks would and should be an individual who has a comprehensive understanding of the topic at hand, as well as of the circumstances of various worldly existences and the various kinds of suffering found in those existences, in particular the so-called three lower existences. And this individual would, one hopes, it should be an individual who does or gives the explanations with the intention to assist those who listen to the explanations, so that those individuals, in effect of what's explained, can make some progress on the path to liberation from rebirth in worldly existences. So the motivation of the speaker is that of assisting those who listen in terms of those individuals being able to make progress on the path to enlightenment.
Permanent Zukorte Sanjeji Shanchup Semba Matisara Todu Jatsu Shugente Shuben Doshi Yote Dinane Chushenking Shetan Kandeji She Gogueva Yinking Kandeji Yin Gogueva Shipshin Tawasong.
Now there is a sutra, the record of a discourse the Buddha gave regarding what was just explained. This discourse came about at the request of a disciple of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva Lodro Gyatso, ocean of knowledge or wisdom. And here Buddha Shakyamuni sets forth the details regarding both the proper mindset of those who listen and the proper mindset of the speaker. And the Buddha begins by explaining that the first and foremost point here is the motivation of the speaker, his reason or reasons for giving the discourse.
Korang sambat la ta che chi tang ke che che te je rang ge mein tang long je tang ta tin de rong de yi je gen de ban du de min du de che rang de yi je gen de ba ji dum ba ji yue na de che xie ju de ya shang bu Tati Tisonza Tangbone Rang Juder Zang Zangjanji Dutamindu Rang Rangla Shimjunan Gogyare.
Now the Buddha begins by saying that the motivation for teaching others must be pure. What does pure mean here? It means that there are no selfish motives. Now, of course, bodhisattvas who have gone beyond the world, bodhisattvas on any of the 10 levels that are beyond the world but prior to enlightenment. Those individuals who have achieved any of these levels of realization would quite naturally have the or be endowed with the adequate motivation. However, the Buddha continues, in the case of those who teach the Buddha Dharma, but who are not yet beyond the world, it is of imperative importance that those individuals, in the case of them explaining the Buddha Dharma to others, that prior to doing so, they ask themselves various questions regarding their motivation. Questions such as, do I hope for any kind of reward in terms of explaining the Buddha Dharma to others? Do I entertain hopes of becoming well known? Do I entertain hopes of acquiring wealth? And so on and so forth. One has to ask oneself numerous questions of this kind in order to make sure that no selfish motives are at hand. Now, if one finds that selfish motives are at hand, the Buddha explained, it's better that, or it is advisable or preferable, however one wants to phrase it, that one doesn't do the lecture then, that one simply cancels the event.
Ti인도 끊는데 정마제. 다 끊는 정마 제바 점지게. 엔디기 요아르베스나. 다통 지 요아마레. 세주기 최대. 랑게 딱 개신이 최대인 직군도는 랑게 슈용. 된 슈바 삼게를 마셔 또스 티게를 삼막당용. 되네 마셔 보면라 양 세주 최대로 삼는 nenten도 땅네. 될라치 마도 바당 록도 태성 그 저만 매버치 용토같이 고기요죠.
Then again regarding the speaker, the Buddha explained, as is recorded in the same sutra, beyond the motivation there are yet other perspectives to be considered. One of them is that of the topic which the individual plans to explain, give a discourse on. It must be the case that the speaker himself has received detailed explanations and teachings on the topic in question from a qualified spiritual friend, so that his knowledge, the speaker, of the topic is adequate. That perspective must be secured, and it must also be the case that the speaker in question hasn't just attended lectures about the topic in question. He must also have himself contemplated what has been explained to him, so that he's arrived at a good, comprehensive understanding of the topic in question. And prior to the lecture, he needs to go through the topic again in order to prepare his presentation for it, and in order to make sure that there aren't any points where he's not quite sure, where perhaps his knowledge isn't adequate, perhaps even mistaken, where it's the case that doubts and hesitations are not at hand. The speaker needs to be sure of that what he's about to speak of is something he really knows.
Tene ta koran chö she sa tela pheche ne ta chö she se kap la chön chgel ya tigel de chatu tene che du sa ve du ja ten zo le yin yang ma chi gu putar ge tsewa chi ngun to tang ne lom ten zo ching nge thar wa tang tham che sim be lam tik to chi ma ro nyam be san ma chi ngun do go bi
then if all this has come together, he would then proceed to give the lecture, and once he has seated himself, in terms of those who listen, he needs to be a person who regards all those who attend in the light of them being as important as an only child of a mother is to the mother. So that level of love and compassion for those who attend is to be part of the mindset of the speaker, so that his only intention in terms of giving the lecture is to provide explanations that could bring about progress for those who attend, to the extent that in the future those who attend will attain either liberation from rebirth in worldly existences, arhathood, or complete and perfect enlightenment, Buddha, the enlightened state.
Tene ta te chötön go ma zu wen han tala tene karche bor songs de yoris nan do ti nan la chö nin kin tan shen kin la tene yang ta me mai chö le me gawa nam che parche sam menu che to de la zong ji song yo de di zong de dan sho song yo.
Next, the Buddha explained, the speaker goes on to recite a so-called dharani. It's a phrase, I suppose one could say, in Sanskrit. There are many of them. Each has its specific purpose. The one at hand here is the one with the purpose of dispelling or doing away with any possible interruptions to the lecture. Interruptions that may be caused by various individuals, who perhaps or who do disagree with a path of virtue, such as a path to enlightenment. So for the sake of preventing hindrances in this regard, the Dharani in question is recited at the outset of the discourse.
Tene tagana shinge ta zongte shongna cha sum den go byare zongten de te charne tembe da bu chamden de la de sha mun ro go byare.
So the Dharani in question is recited 3 times, and that is to be followed by the recitation of a praise to Buddha Shakyamuni.
Tene te charwata tene che ta karshu ta zawata yube lamala soldep jian don go bi.
That's followed by a supplication to the masters of the lineage of the tradition to which one belongs.
Tati into perna tange tatinte follow up chasam chitu me na yang kan tutu jindo dinan songma na shinchi chebare ta kasan shi chue shedu.
Now Khenpo Rinpoche says regarding his person that he tries to, and has done so previously as well, to follow these instructions set forth by Buddha Shakyamuni.
Karshu. Tati yang chue yin king wen chashana perna dringe ni de take back on drebe chue shugu yona chue yin king de samma tang tang la yang tachi lamji nyamnen denzo la tenne nga korbe nende ne chitar chi chego tembe samna chi korgo.
Then there are those who attend the discourse and their motivation, their mindset. And here the Buddha explained that if one is a person who practices Theravada Buddhism, that branch of Buddhism, then the basic motivation for attending a discourse should be the following, namely that one attends the discourse for the sake of acquiring knowledge which will make it possible for one, which will permit one to make progress on the path to liberation.
다가난 신게 택바 침부게 최진 연계 요나 되네 삼바송축 조도 샘게 바세데 남케 가르잡게 샘진라 내 핑토바시 제보여 디체도 내 상제지 공부 룩거 점배 남바니 댕게 샘제도 건도 로고비.
Then there is Mahayana Buddhism and the motivation of those practicing that branch of Buddhism, and it's about so-called bodhicitta, the Bodhi mind, which focuses on all sentient beings in number as vast as the sky, having taken the decision in terms of the individual practitioner to make efforts on the path so that enlightenment, Buddha, the enlightened state, is attained, in consequence of which the individual is truly able to benefit all beings. So there the motivation has two perspectives, that of attaining Buddha, the enlightened state, and that of then working tirelessly in order to guide others to the attaining of the same state.
대신 송화도 취지 생기 여비나 닝킨당 생기니까 그 삼나당당의 양조화식 당고고요.
Then there is a subsection of Mahayana Buddhism, the Buddhist Tantras, where there are yet other perspectives, both in terms of the speaker and those who attend.
Penna, tatrin kaza, perju nanting, get gore shukwasoge. Ta lama chi penna wang da de na wang bu shun ang do ang ha ko di kabla ngaran sa sam ta na ten tin chi go ya ngo ma chu na.
Now in terms of Tibetan Buddhism, quite well known in many parts of the world today, it's very often on the program, or an empowerment is very often on the program, and here it's exceedingly important that everyone involved pay attention to their mindset, to their motivation.
Penna wang kurdan ken lama kan de chi na yang tege kurju yedam plain jeram tang matar wa chi gogi ba kona.
Now the Lama, the spiritual guide who gives the empowerment, da den de che tupa chi gogi ore sung gi ore.
Ya atak kurdu plain ngajer zong tu ba chi gogi ore maton digmarwa.
The minimum requirement, as it were, in terms of qualification or qualifications is that the Lama in question yidam de kandrigi kone.
Ta yidam pena ta jesun jambe yang wang chi kurwa yina ngon du jesun jambe yang thana yang jesun jambe yang ge nin se ngon du sungwa. Jesun jambe yang ge jezo ge ne she wa ten de ge lama chi gogruwa.
The basic point in this context is that the Lama in question must have himself done the meditation at hand, whatever the yidam may or may not be. We can take the example of Manjushri. So in terms of any such meditation practice, there is always a prescribed number of the mantras that are to be recited, and so on and so forth. There are prescribed instructions in terms of completing, to some extent, the meditation practice. Also, of course, in terms of the Buddhist Tantras, you have two basic types of meditation. The stages of meditation where the practitioner generates the mandala, as it were, the yidam, and the world, that enlightened world of the yidam. And then you have stages where the perspective of absolute reality is to be incorporated or incorporated with the first perspective, so that in the end both are at hand. And both types of meditation have various stages. It's not as if you have one perspective in terms of the first type and just another one in terms of the second type. There are various stages with regard to both meditations. So the individual who gives the empowerment should be someone who is proficient with respect to both types of meditation.
대전도 왕꾸르비투나 왕제 텐소 양 타말 제수 마송와 다 야외고 송 투기란진도 살답투밤 야나 잘바 링나로 살답투바고요.
Then, during an empowerment, there is the use of a variety of what one perhaps may refer to as ritual implements or ritual objects. All of them are symbols which point to body, speech, and mind in the context of Buddha, the enlightened state, objects which point to the so-called 5 types of primordial knowledge, and of course the individual who gives the empowerment should know all of those implications, so that the ritual objects are not just those objects, but a vehicle for either body, speech, and mind of Buddha, the enlightened state, or the 5 types of primordial knowledge, and that this is conveyed at some level to those who attend the empowerment.
대 조합보 속에 있는 양 상주심 문으로 찍다 때는 왕 담바당 담직된도 출전도 삼배 담자다 제대 왕도 주는 거고요.
Then you have those who take the empowerment, and their mindset is to be that of the Bodhi mind, as described earlier, and there must also be the intention to uphold the code of ethics associated with the empowerment, as well as the commitments, the samaya, that one takes in the context of receiving the empowerment.
단디 거는 몽부 슈된 슈엔도데 답해쟁에 셰지 거는 라지스다.
Now, Khenpo Rinpoche says there are many more details regarding what he's just been talking about. However, we'll call it a day here, because otherwise we won't have time to get into the topic that is to be explained today. There won't be time for that. Yeah. Anyway, this is the answer to the question, what about the purpose and so on of the recitations done at the beginning of a lecture. And here in this context, the context of a discourse, Khen Rinpoche focuses on Buddha Shakyamuni while cultivating the intention to give, of course, an adequate explanation of the topic. And that the body-mind will arise within the minds of all. Next, he recites a prayer to the 8 great bodhisattvas who were personal and very distinguished disciples of Buddha Shakyamuni. Next, he recites a supplication to the masters of the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism, simply because in this life that's the tradition he belongs to.
Lama Tamje Nana Kadin Cheshu Ravate, Yankam Barella, Serap Tamje to Karma Be, Yes Zonge Che to Karma Palasova Che Tabi.
Next, he supplicates the Karma Pa or the Karma Pas, keeping in mind that this is about a line of reincarnated masters, each of them known as a Karmapa, praying that he may in this life continue as a disciple of the Karmapa, and that this will also happen in all his future lives, that he in all his future lives becomes a disciple of a Karmapa.
But Hindanga can be Chita Shekinta, Yinkinke, Samnatang, Gunchu, the Sutate, Churchin Chavagina, Churcheni Chaval, Getashi, which you.
Now, if both the speaker and those who attend conform with the explanations given, the result is that of great virtue.
Then Jute Naranzo gave it Sawa the Trola Mindo Cheto, gets at the Sanje top Cheto, then that you shen King Yinayang Hoa Teche, King Yinayang gets at the Shanjup to Mobo.
And at the end of the discourse, all involved, the speaker and those who attend, dedicate the great virtue that have come to pass in this way towards the enlightenment of all, for the sake of preventing any possible loss of that could otherwise occur as to the great virtue that has come to pass.
Tinde ta khazange ngmege chöte ta ngmache shedu chötamje tongbadang dangme ba sangge thentla 대섬지 쇼타 쇼마 송섬섬 라오지 좀 디인산 디고도 스징에 니만이 다던 셰기마.
Now, during the previous course, where Khenpo Rinpoche explained about the four seals of Buddhism, there were a few perspectives regarding the third that there wasn't time to explain or talk about, and for the sake of filling in what Khenpo Rinpoche feels is missing information, this weekend and the next weekend will be devoted to giving that information.
Ta deyinde ta darin chöshesan deyang benna chösochi gnane shegi yore ninkin soyang mang chewate je namba sanje chogurshu tarba tönirge lo yungkin janjang gi ningi yobre mang chewate deyinde ta dajin gongdo shebe samma tang ti dene gamende ma shugi yore.
So the place of the lecture, or the lectures, rather, is that of a Buddhist center. And in terms of those who attend, the majority are individuals who practice the Buddhist path and who take as their focus attaining liberation from rebirth in worldly existences. Therefore, in terms of the majority of those who attend, what has been explained till now, today, should apply.
Ta kazangi sheji tu tongbadang dangme senkengi tuande tam rani tarbaji toyeche korwanda dungechi resha dela nganso chi sendeam ta dum jewa kashegi ju ne korwala tartubaji chego gombeki samnaji yonkinji ina ta korwala tar gobala 똥바동 당미지 된 신주 말로지 마돈는 나 코르바르산은 타투비 여가 말해.
Now, so presumably the majority of the viewers are people who focus on attaining liberation from an endless rebirth in worldly existences. Individuals who practice the Buddhist path with the intention to attain liberation from rebirth in worldly existences, either at the end of this life or at the end of a few lifetimes. Now, in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to actualize that intention, one needs to have a proper knowledge of so-called emptiness, the fact that all phenomena are empty and without a self. And one's knowledge of this must be correct. It can't be mistaken or incomplete, etc. Because that would have the consequence of not being able to attain the goal one has set out to attain. that of liberation from rebirth in worldly existences. So a correct or comprehensive or complete, however one wants to phrase it, knowledge of emptiness is a must in order to attain that goal. It's not possible otherwise.
Panangandu sakcheche kewa sakpalatene flatang mi luten pedem pomcha shewa tungshur mongbo tenga long yejure telin mongbo ta sakche megewa sakpalatene ngisong samlayan tega se chede tranji mishebash.
Now, Buddhism emphasizes a virtuous way of life. Now, you have two basic types of virtue. You have the kind of virtue which is tainted by the ways of the world. Good actions, however, not the kind of virtue which acts as an aid in terms of attaining liberation from rebirth in worldly existences. So it's virtue tainted by the ways of the world. And any individual will have engaged in this kind of virtue. These kind of actions will have been practiced by any individual in this life and in previous lives, in consequence of which we all have taken trillions and trillions of rebirths in good but worldly circumstances, in the realm of gods and in the realm of human beings with good circumstances. Then we have the opposite of what one perhaps may refer to as worldly virtue, namely non-virtue, which by way of being non-virtue is tainted by the ways of the world. And the same has occurred in the context of non-virtue. We have all engaged in non-virtue throughout trillions and trillions of lifetimes, in consequence of which we have taken as many rebirths in lower existences, referred to as lower or inferior simply because the circumstances there are circumstances of great suffering.
Ta rinpol samla tang matum na yang zamlin chung chung di ten to samla shi tang na ta pen na ngaran su che te ta chet ne rangji su yin samla shi tang ta zamlin na ne milu ya chi nga zo top de bri nga zo sa ju yo re tong ju yo re kan ju yo re ta ga na shin ge kang ye mang chu na na long ge men do ten de che de milu ya chi top de bri yen na yang Diyang ta kaset zondu, tenga kaset zondu, lo kaset zondu. Ta maungpa kaset deyo sari samna jitangda. Ta tong tong re tsari. Tene kaban ro sari deyo tang, tongpa tang dangme tawen tala lo makam na, yangchir leka na yes po rogirwa.
Now, in order to sort of have an overview regarding what was said, one just needs to look at oneself. Consider your present circumstances. All of us have food, housing, etc. We have what's necessary in order to be able to have quite a good life, a good standard, as it were. We're not born in a country that is at war with another country and the like. Our circumstances are pretty good considering the circumstances of other parts of our world, for example. Next, consider your age simply. In the context of how long a lifetime could possibly be. And the majority would probably find that a lot of years have passed. And one should there ask oneself the question, have I done during all those years what it takes to make a turn for the better in my next life? Have my lifestyle been one which secures good circumstances in my next life or not? And how much time do I actually have left of this lifetime for me to make the changes necessary to secure that? And in the context of having the hope of attaining liberation from worldly existences, one needs to further ask oneself, do I have an unmistaken knowledge of emptiness? Do I truly know that things are empty and without a self? Tongpa Tang. Because in terms of liberation, that's a must in order to be able to attain liberation at all.
다가난 신게 맞죠? 동바동 담이 되는데 만으로지 당보 침받는체 되니 뒤
동바동 담이
되는데 동보 만으로지 나랑게 이시스게 되니 동바동 담이 되는데 또 어째 단데레 인사를 선성게 저는 고아지 랩소나 고아티게를 양네 양도로데 감추다 땅은 좀 미세 니나라 나라우치 차샤나 미세기 탈래 뭐라래 나라우치게 동바동 당미게 돼 뭔도 맞추르나야 로테쇼도 송알라 됐네
ngonjurmeina양
로데
meina양 로데
동바동 당미게 돼라 쇼바치르와 디 쇼라
야
디 인도 텐데르 때네 제와 예마 남수 동바다 당맹문도 줄토와체 땡땡 용그래 셔싱겐 노이노도 데 송샤
So in terms of entertaining the hope of attaining liberation from yet another rebirth in a worldly existence, as was said, one must acquire an unmistaken knowledge of the fact that all things are empty and without a self. And there must be no room for mistakes. Because once you're mistaken in your knowledge of emptiness, liberation from rebirth in worldly existences is not possible. So, in terms of acquiring this kind of knowledge, one has to take great care and secure that mistakes are not at hand. In consequence of developing that knowledge, one may reach a point where one has the impression, or one is quite sure, that one has a good understanding of emptiness. One which isn't mistaken. That doesn't translate into a direct knowledge of emptiness. We're here talking about the various stages of developing an unmistaken knowledge of emptiness as one's basis for acquiring insight of the true nature of reality simply.
맞아. 셔싱도 있는 듯.
Da di nortul me pe kova de jönar va.
Ja.
Tene korve chola dogma va.
Dogma.
You see the point of having, or the point of developing an unmistaken knowledge of emptiness is that once there is an unmistaken knowledge of emptiness, there will be a shift as to one's mindset. Mind will no longer so easily be swayed by how to phrase this, the temptations of the world, as it were, our desires and so on regarding things in the world. Once there is an unmistaken knowledge of that things are empty, things are without a self, worldly habits will to some extent be put at rest, which means that one's mindset is a mindset which focuses more on liberation from rebirth in worldly existences than previously. Khenpo Rinpoche explains about his own person that he is a person of a high age. He's at the end of this life. There isn't a great many years to come, as it were. And even though he says, I do not have a direct knowledge of emptiness, as my mind has made the shift, as it were, just described in brief, there is the focus of the fact that all things are empty and without a self, to quite some extent, to a greater extent than earlier. And that may secure that at the end of this lifetime or in a few lifetimes, liberation from rebirth in worldly existences can be attained. Now, this is something that Buddha Shakyamuni himself has told anyone interested in finding this out, namely that once this shift has occurred, there is a great chance of attaining a good rebirth. And here a good rebirth, the word good doesn't necessarily refer to one's worldly circumstances, rather to the fact that one has the circumstances of continuing on the path of knowledge of emptiness, as was described, so that liberation from rebirth in worldly existences can be attained within a few lifetimes, hopefully.
Zambulin di nanto lomba mendrawa yulkam mendrawa ne pape chuwa jinyeji yor yin yang chutenzo taman rosa yamsore mato yomare songare konge chu jinyeji songwa tamje yang ta It's
also recorded in yet another Prashna Paramita discourse that the Buddha said the following, namely, consider this example, he said, in this world, the world system we live in, planet Earth, as it were, has numerous rivers flowing through the various countries of this world. Now, they all have the same destination, an ocean. All rivers, however many, all of them without a single exception, end up, the waters of them that is, end up in an ocean. Similarly, Buddha Shakyamuni said, all the Buddhist topics I have set forth have the same destination, that of emptiness.
Tene penna nintu tapa Daniel Loyan Kinchi in a young, Dongbadang Dangme, Dogogre, Taiwachim Bashonju, Sembe Danone in a young, Compong turned to near Kinchi in a young, Dongbadang Dangme turned to Dogogre. Now, Lamegin non Kinchi in a young, Dongbadang Dangme turned to Dogogre, turned them Rosatanare.
Now, in terms of the various Buddhist branches, Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, and in Mahayana Buddhism you find a subsection called the Buddhist Tantras. All of them are about attaining a direct knowledge of, a realization of the fact that all things are empty and without a self.
Lasso, that in some page number 2
So that's all for today. Now, in terms of you having questions, you may communicate that via email, and we'll see later on when and if there will be time for answering your questions. But at any rate, you're welcome to email questions you may have.
Sunam de tamje zegbani tobden yebe dranam pamje 제가 나제 발랍 추와이 식베 솔렌로와 도와쇼 오남 잘본데다 저기 타옌로와 핀시지 군도송보 젬베 용도 니송 내남마르 동바르쇼 That's all.